Welcome to the CXPA sponsored webinar by Verizon about how the global pandemic has accelerated the flight to digital and consumers are sharing more of their personal data with brands than ever before. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Litley and I'm a CXP program assistant with the CXPA. This webinar is being recorded and the recording will be emailed to you later today. The recording will also be made available on the webinar page of the CXPA website and for all of our CXP certified attendees. This webinar is CRC eligible and will be recorded in your account within 2 weeks. And now, without further ado, I hand it over to Jerry to get us started.
Thank you, Lee. I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone, and we're excited to kind of share with you some information that we've learned from research that we've been doing with a company called Longitude and understanding what consumers' confidence exists in data sharing and how their acceptance of new technology is in the market today. So we're happy to cover some of the key highlights from that piece today, and we'll be getting started now. So this is our proprietary statement just stating that Verizon owns the content and that we have sole responsibility for it. Today's presenters, those people joining me, people near and dear because they are on my team, is Mr. Gordon Litley, Managing Director of Domain and Vertical Business Development. Gordon certainly runs this practice today, but has extensive experience in the CX practice because he built that CX practice for us here at Verizon. In addition, Peter Thompson, who's the Senior Manager for Strategy and Business Development for the Vertical Domains practice today, but also has a background in marketing and product marketing in particular here at Verizon. So we're going to leverage his expertise and kind of leverage how he uses data to connect to customers. And as Leah said, I'm Jerry Traflett. I'm a managing partner for retail, travel, and hospitality and distribution domain. And my experience is being in the bleeding edge of innovation for retail for many years and helping retailers understand how to connect to the customer to drive that differentiated customer experience that we also look for. As I mentioned, the content that we're covering today comes from a white paper, which you'll have available to you through some of the links from this webcast. And the focus for us in actually doing this data was to really spend more time understanding what was truly important to consumers as they shared data with us. What this data was, this is the second in the series that Longitude did for us. The first one was focused on a lot of their willingness to share and the protection of data, in particular around customers. But in September of 2020, Longitude surveyed 6,000 consumers in 15 countries to understand how consumers interact digitally with brands. The respondents were evenly divided between men and women and ranged in age from 18 to 65. The goal was to understand how comfortable they were in sharing data and with the use of more advanced technology such as artificial intelligence or facial recognition as an example. The results identified areas of risk and opportunity for brands, and we'll discuss those things today with you. The survey indicated that a significant majority of respondents were uncomfortable with brands using third-party data. To be clear, third-party data is data bought from the market from a variety of sources, some reliable and some not. But it isn't data gathered by the brand owners themselves. And so what was clear is that that was a challenge for many consumers in the fact that that data was purchased. So consumers are often hesitant to provide personal data without information about knowing about where it comes from. So it may be difficult for them to deliver a personalized experience if they don't have an understanding of the consumer. So Gordon, we're going to jump into your CX experience and say, why do you believe consumers are sharing data and what are their hesitancies?
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. First of all, it's great to be with you and Pete here today, and I want to thank the good folks at CXPA for giving us such a fantastic forum. CXPA's audience is always fun to interact with, so good to be here today. So yeah, I think this question, I don't think there's one answer to this question. I'll give you my personal point of view here, which is corroborated in the actual study itself, but I think there's kind of two camps here. Those of us who share data out of complacency, in other words, we know it's happening, but we view the chore of managing it as too difficult. So we're complacent in that data. And consumers, we've been sharing data for more than 2 decades now. We've been in a digital world for better part of 2 decades, further than 2 decades actually. So, so the key is understanding, why we would share data to begin with if we go beyond complacency, and it's about exactly what the page says here, and it's about we're demanding better experiences. So to get that better experience, there's a trade-off. I'm willing to share a little bit of information about myself to, improve my shopping experience, improve my browsing experience, the way I, search for information. All those experiences are predicated on some level of data that I knowingly or unknowingly are sharing. And when presented with the option, so we're all seeing websites today where you got the little cookie notification there at the bottom. The bad ones, the ones that are done poorly, are the ones that just give you an option to accept, which is, hey, here's the cookie data we're collecting, or click on this link and we'll share with you what we're collecting. To proceed, accept. A better example, I ran across a website the other day where I got the ability to accept, decline, or actually customize the data that they're going to collect during my session on that website. And so it's interesting, being a CX professional, I clicked on the one that said customize, and there, point blank, I was presented with a bunch of questions on the amount of data that they collect. So now at that particular point, I hadn't developed a trust with that brand, so I didn't choose to share a lot. But given that option on a brand that I trust, and we're going to get to that here in a second, I think I'm going to be much more open about that when I know that there's a return on that investment that I'm going to make in sharing my data, and that is a better experience. So I really think it falls into two camps.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. I am seeing some of those changes that you talked about from an app perspective as well. So I'm encouraged that they're gonna open up to letting the consumer be more in control of different things. Pete, what's your perspective?
From a rethink perspective, externally, there's an awful lot on the table right now. Google is looking at retiring third-party cookies probably in the next calendar year, so that's going to change the equation. The CEOs of Apple and Facebook started feuding about a month ago over their customer data privacy and what's being shared. In fact, Facebook in the last week has settled a lawsuit for $650 million over the improper use of AI and photo tagging. So there's an awful lot happening with the purveyors of this third-party data. Internally, I feel that marketers really need to understand how that third-party data use can impact their brand. I'm becoming more and more convinced that as you look at some of the complex personas that people lead, they have so many different digital footprints. It can really hurt the brand when they're presenting third-party data that they've collected that's mismatching the persona that their customers engage with. So it's really something brands need to be careful of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it when they send me emails for erectile dysfunction products, and I'm not a guy. So it's like not knowing who they are, and they're trying to figure you out. So they buy data from anywhere just to make certain that they've got something that they can put in front of you. But it hurts, as you say, it hurts the brand greatly when it's wrong. It's misinformation.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that gets those ads.
Okay, I knew I was not going to bring that one up. Okay, so let's go into the next issue that we found in the results that we had. So trust in brands' data use is definitely limited. The consumers are limited in trusting brands generally, and they're confused how their data is used. I mean, there's a lot of information that's gathered without us even knowing it, and they don't understand that. So in the survey itself, we saw a lot of wariness generally about what brands were doing with the data and where they were getting the data. So there's that lack of trust that they have. Should they share? And they share, as Gordon laid out, it's convenient. I can get offers and promotions. If I'm between the age of 18 and 34, I'm more likely to share it because it's just, I'm a digital native or I'm a millennial, and that's just part of my nature. But it's important for us to understand what it means to these consumers as they're concerned about it. So as we step into the digital world, as we call it, building a digital platform is the most important thing that many of our customers are doing today, and making certain that they're enabling that customer experience in a way that's meaningful. So Pete, how would you help these brand companies to use new technologies in a way that it might be more palatable to the consumer?
Yeah, the easy place to start with is that passive authentication. Authentication is always the first step to personalization, and it really eases that customer experience as you engage. You want to focus on bringing the brand to life digitally. I certainly encourage folks to, investing in building their own, customer appropriate person relationships. Use those customer data insights and first person relationships to help as your customers transition channels. They're there in person, they're on the website, they're in the contact center. Perhaps they've invested in a digital avatar. It's okay for the brand to use all of that information that your customers contributed to you in that direct engagement. But, we've all been frustrated when you're engaged with a brand and they're asking you to re-authenticate. Jerry, give me your password again. Oh, I don't know the conversation that I had 10 minutes ago with someone else. And you're really left with that experience. Go, wait a minute, this brand knows more about what I was doing on my competitor's website or with their competitor's website than they know what I was talking about with their brand 10 minutes ago. And that's really the opportunity that brands have to be better.
Gordon, do you have any feedback here as well?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity here to learn from our past. I'm old enough to remember when the reasons we developed IVR. Automation is not new, whether it be digital, voice, whatever. Automation has always been a trend in this space. And if we can learn from our past on ways not to design, we'll be much better served going forward. And if you think about it in this context, still to this day, you see organizations who are designing around the objective of reducing call volume into the contact center. So if you think about that for a second, I'm trying to figure out a way not to talk to my customer. And that's not the right approach. And when you design around those types of objectives, you're not designing around what the consumer actually wants or needs, and you're missing the boat. So we've all had bad experiences with AI, chatbots, IVRs. All of us have experienced those, and that develops a negative connotation towards a brand. So to me, the answer to this, whether it's new technology, existing technology, or old technology, it's design around customer centricity as being your first objective. And we all know those brands who are doing that well. And 10 years ago, we, as a CX kind of discipline, we were horrible at it. The last 10 years, we've gotten a lot better at that, and we see that kind of advance more and more in our design practices. So regardless of what the technology is, and we all see the benefit of these new technologies, we all experience the benefit every day. Pete mentioned one of them. Authentication is fantastic when you experience it in the right way. So if you design leveraging these technologies around the customer in mind and what the customer is trying to do, there's lots of tools out there, design thinking, jobs to be done theory. These are all design tools that need to be leveraged so that you build trust in your brand through the use of those tools versus pushing them away because you're forcing a customer to deal with you the way you dictate versus allowing your customer to dictate. So to me, the answer to this is simple. Whether regardless of new, old, existing tech, you got to design around the customer.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, my kingdom for a person to talk to when you have a problem that is not typical. I mean, it's just I had an unusual situation yesterday where I had a note coming from one of those large online retailers saying that they were sending me a MacBook Pro and they're going to charge me $2,000. And I'm like, I just want to talk to someone to make certain that this is spam, and that's exactly what it was. But I had to get to a human being, and even then I couldn't talk to them. I had to use text to get there. So I mean, again, it has to be what the customer needs, and we've got a large demographic of customers. You've got the millennials and digital natives that are perfectly comfortable with a lot of that stuff. A lot of the boomers and Xers are not as comfortable with some of those things, so you got to meet the customer where they are, as you were saying, Gordon.
Yeah, I'll just add to that one, Jerry. Again, as a marketer, you look at it and you say, on the one hand, we're trying not to engage with the customers because of perceived cost in having these calls come in. And on the other hand, I'm paying lots of money to understand what they're doing with third parties. As the pivot is get them talking to your brand. Spend less time trying to figure out what they're doing other places. Get to understand what they're talking to your brand about. Great opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And you're trying to build that loyalty and they know me, they like me. That's the thing you want the customer to come away with. and that you trust them for sure. So even as we look at the next piece is what we saw when we looked at the respondents in this particular survey was that they tended to fall into 3 buckets. Those free spirits that were willing to share data easily, a lot of millennials and digital natives, the cynics that will never share data with you, at least they don't think they want to, and those that need more convincing. They were just unsure about a lot of things. All 3 of those groups disliked the use of third-party data, and so they wanted things to be very transparent. But I mean, what are the ways that we need to help? Let me go to Pete. What are the ways that marketing can help these guys stay in the boat? So keep the free spirits in the boat, move the needs more convincing into the boat, or at least in a more positive way, and then make sure the cynics don't leave. So what can we do, Pete?
You know, I think the big thing is if a brand can begin to understand who their customers are and start getting into these categories, you know, observe how they're interacting with the brand and start doing some basic bucketization. You know, there's a way that you can message and have fun with the free spirits using gamification, using some of the cool new things that are out there. Conversely, if someone's a cynic, you just don't want to use those tactics. So really it's starting to understand what kind of customers do I have? Where do they fit? What's their level of comfort? And don't push my brand narrative beyond their comfort space.
Mm-hmm. Gordon, do you have a way of reassuring people about how data is used? Is Gordon there?
Got himself muted.
Oh, I know that problem. I've had that problem.
Sorry, guys. I was clearing my throat, so I muted myself. Forgot to take it back off. But I think there's a couple ways to look at this. I look at my own habits, and with some brands, I am a free spirit. Brands I've already developed a level of trust with. Where I don't have that trust developed, I'm going to be more on the cynic or need more convincing side of things. A big brand and probably need more convincing. A lesser known brand, I'm definitely going to be a cynic. So I think transparency is the answer to the question in terms of how you reassure customers about how your data is being used. And then finally, you know, putting the customer in control. You know, I mentioned that website, it was awesome. And just the fact that brand gave me control of what information I wanted to share with them is going to develop a level of trust on a brand that was my first time interacting with that brand. And just being given that option is going to develop a level of trust.
Gordon, was that a newer brand or one that had been around that was now updating their interaction?
Yeah, small brand, a very niche brand in a very niche market. So so now not a well-known big name brand.
Okay, and that we see that often happening because they're listening to their customers who are asking for those things. And I think some of the brands that have been around for a while are the ones that are more entrenched, shall we say, trying to get to that next level, and then understanding how to interact with the customer in a different way. Yeah. Some of some of the things that we've learned in this process is that to get to that personalized CX, we need integrity and transparency, just as you stated. And it was clear that when they looked at the respondents, most of them were fairly positive, but as it came to not knowing how their personal data is gathered or what benefit they would get from it, they were clearly concerned about that. So, Gordon, how do you earn consumers' trust?
Yeah, so I think that there isn't one answer to this. I think there's a lot of things you have to do. We've already touched on transparency, and you know, given the customer a view of how you're sharing data and putting them in control of the decisions of how their data is being used, I think is a first step. But then you also have to be clear around how you're designing your journey. And if you're creating a journey that's designed around how the customer wants to do business and leverages that data that they've chosen to share, you're going to build additional trust in the brand. And then as that experience gets better, as I go through the life cycle journey with a brand, I'm going to continue to develop trust. And over time, if given the option, I may share more data. because I'm enjoying my time with that brand. I'm enjoying the journey that I'm on with that brand, and I want to, constantly improve that journey. So I think that transparency is absolutely key throughout the journey, and throughout the customer life cycle and the relationship that you build with an individual. So which takes you back to the personalization. So to really build a relationship with a customer, you've got to have that level of personalization that they're expecting, and that, so it's a catch-22. Chicken and egg, which comes first, and you got to do it all at the same time to drive people to your brand and to keep people at your brand.
Mm-hmm. So Pete, I was thinking about this. Do you think COVID-19, the pandemic that we've been through, is pushing certainly the need to have more data, because we're having more people shop online and shopping remotely? And do you believe that this is pushing the need for change in how we interact with the consumer? How do we give them that personalized experience by, as we've been talking about, having integrity and transparency as we do it?
Well, it certainly does. And for people who were digital laggards, obviously, COVID kind of forced their hand. You needed to be online. You needed to shop that way. And I think a lot of people maybe who were reluctant are now saying, wow, this is a great way to be. Maybe I don't want to drive to the store even after COVID. But, as the marketing side of this, my rule has always been, you want to treat the customer data like it's your own. If you wouldn't want to use your PII data that way, then don't do that with your customers' data. So that's a litmus test that's out there. And then in scenarios where people are using AI in these personalization efforts, that human supervision of AI is becoming more and more important. It's often commingled with ethical use of AI, but you don't need some crafty hacktivist out there engaging with your digital artificial intelligence and teaching it to say unsavory things and then posting it on social media to draw attention to themselves. And there's all kinds of scenarios you can imagine. And the simple answer is people need to supervise the systems they're creating, and whether that's the use of the data on the upfront, or whether it's the AI that's used in practice, human supervision on an ongoing basis is critical here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Well, we do have a bit of a challenge when it comes to trust and integrity, because most of us have had data breaches occur in our lives, and the respondents that we had, at least 28% had their data compromised, and at least half of them had one incident in the last 2 years. So that's not exactly great. And we know that the free spirits that are more willing to share will allow you some issue, at least one. But if it happens more than once, if you can't secure their data, if you can't make certain that that you won't be breached again, there is a really huge concern, I guess, in looking at what it's going to take to make certain that they feel trusted with you having their data. So how do you respond to an incident like a misuse or a breach? How do you get over this problem with your consumers? Peter.
When it happens, being candid, forthright, transparent, getting all the information out as fast as possible. I think we've all gotten these letters. We've watched different brands and how they've responded. Generally, the ones that were led by the CMO, not the CISO and the legal department, tend to come out of these things the best. Unfortunately, we've gotten to a place where people accept that this is going to happen. But I can say you've got to, as a brand, be proactive here. And part of that being proactive is understanding the kind of data you're assembling about folks. That next generation data thief is going to get a lot more than a social security number, a credit card, and the name of your pet. As you're capturing these customer insights, you've got to understand your customer. You've got to delete that source data. You've got to anonymize at the source whenever possible. So part of being responsible here isn't just being transparent after the fact and telling people what happened. I think consumers today are going to say, hey, how did this brand prepare? What kind of data were they really assembling? What were, their password practices? You see things in the paper where you still, password defaults and, they weren't really taking information security seriously. So I still say that you've got to be proactive and be taking prudent steps. And I think consumers are starting to get sophisticated to the point where they understand, someone who's been a victim of a crime versus someone who's been irresponsible with their data.
Mm-hmm. I remember some of the first breaches that occurred in retail occurred in very large retailers that were out there, and it was a huge spotlight for them, huge issue for these brands, and they went out of their way to make certain that they pulled a lot of their systems back in-house to secure them better. And one example, their PIN pad technology had been hacked, and they were able to capture every credit card transaction over months, a period of time. So they went out of their way to do identity protection services for those accounts, and they have restored that brand name, but it took a lot of effort and it was a costly expense for them. But their customers feel like they have made the changes necessary to secure that information, and they are a loyal brand today, or at least consumers are pretty loyal to that brand. So I think those are critical things in understanding kind of how to get them back. Gordon, do you have input on what we do after a breach?
Yeah, those numbers on the right side of this page speak for themselves. We live in a world where, misuse, bad actors, breaches, whatever term you want to put on it, it's going to happen. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And I've got several examples myself. I fall in that statistic there on the right. 3 brands in particular where I had credentials that were stolen. In one case, I had one of my banks, my savings account was emptied overnight. In another case, somebody decided they were going to hack into my mileage account with my favorite airline and fly 4 people to the Dominican Republic. And in another situation, a very large online retailer, my credentials were stolen and a bunch of stuff was ordered that I had no insight into. Now, 2 of those brands I'm still with. Another of those brands I'm not with. And the way you restore trust is, number one, Pete touched on it, it's transparency. And you got to do it quickly. We can all remember one of the big credit bureaus got hacked, and it was several months before they actually announced what had happened. So, as consumers, we're all sitting here knowing that our data has been out there for several months, unbeknownst to us. So, you got to do it quickly. Step up to it, and then you got to make it right. Jerry, you talked about the retailer that made it right, and it cost them considerable amount of dollars to do that, but in the end, they saved their brand. And Pete hit on the fact that you got to be proactive about that. So, the reality is you can mitigate risk quite a bit, but you can never eliminate the risk. So you have to be prepared. You have to have contingency planning on when it does happen to you, and you got to be prepared on what your action plan is to do it, both from a systems and IT perspective to protect the data, as well as from a marketing and brand message standpoint. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and as long as you're planning, you're taking the right precautionary steps to avoid it and mitigate it, and then plan for the worst, you're going to do just fine.
Well, so you were still with 2 of the brands that of the 3 different breaches that you experienced. Did those 2 brands make you whole?
Yeah, they made me whole, but I'll tell you the biggest difference was oftentimes in breaches, the onus is on us, the consumer, to rectify it, right? So if you're going to force the consumer, where you are the one that allowed my information to be compromised and your system got hacked using my credentials, and if there's something I can do to improve, communicate that, tell me what could be done. Many brands do that pretty well, but in most cases, I think I was a victim of somebody, voice fraud started it, and then the actual incident was perpetrated on a digital channel. So then, and again, they don't share how my information was hacked. I can only assume at that point. But the biggest difference with the brand I stuck with versus the one I left was how much effort I had to put in to restore my identity and restore my account. And the one that made that more difficult is the one I'm not with anymore. Mm-hmm. So you want to own that and help your consumer get their, their credentials back, restore their credentials. You want to simplify it for them to restore their identity and prove who they are. You got to make that a simple process. Otherwise, they're just going to have a negative view of your brand, and they're going to tell everybody else that they talk to about it, and you're not going to do yourselves any favor. So you got to simplify that restoration process when somebody does get compromised.
Excellent. I agree. Absolutely.
It sounds a little counterintuitive, Jerry, but those types of data breaches are actually a bigger event for the CMO than they are for the CISO. And that's, on the prepare side, you see a lot of folks preparing, with forensic retainers on the CISO side, but not necessarily enough preparation on the CMO side, because that's where the onus of this communication plan to customers is going to sit.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I mean, and when the CMO, as you said, takes control of that response, then you get a different understanding of what's important to the customer, and they solve the problem in a different way. You need to solve it from a CISO perspective because security is tantamount these days, but you've got to solve it from a brand equity perspective as well. So speaking of brand equity, this clearly does have an impact on the brand equity of the various brands that are there. And there's a tremendous opportunity for companies that do it right, as we've been talking. So making sure that they can keep the customer's data private, but making sure that the customer is in charge. Having the power of personalized customer experience, a digital customer experience, often really means that we have to get to that consumer in a different way. So making sure that they allow us to do that in a way where we can protect the information that they've provided to us, and that we can continue to have that experience we're looking for as consumers. Comments on this statement, Gordon?
Yeah, absolutely. I think brand equity is precisely the objective, because once you develop that kind of brand image, you're going to draw customers. Brings me back to the old adage of what's the purpose of business. And usually when you ask the question what the purpose of business is, you're going to get answers like revenue, margin, profitability, etc. The reality is that is not the purpose of business. That's the outcome. That's how the business measures themselves. It's the outcome only. It's not the purpose. The purpose of business is to earn customers. And you only do that by building your brand. And again, there's not one answer to do that. We're talking about privacy and putting customers in control here. But that brand equity is what's absolutely paramount to compete in today's world. And book after book after book has been written about it. Capitalism 3.0 is really consumerism. Consumers in control of the economy and control of how we view brands. And most brands, unfortunately, are still reacting to that versus leading in that. And again, we all know we can name those brands that we deal with that lead in that. And I've even seen companies reinvest in that. Companies that are already known for being, customer centric, are announcing plans to recertify that, reinvest in that public image that they have, because after all, building your brand is done out of culture. It's not done out of some tactic or 1, 2, 3 checkbox that you fill. It's a culture initiative, and if you don't have the right culture, having all the smart plans in the world aren't going to help.
I agree, and it's not a one and done. You have to keep reinventing yourself.
Exactly.
It is about the relationship that you build with the customer that you have.
Yeah.
So Pete, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think some brands are really going to figure these technologies and services out. I look at gaming, which today is already a $150 billion industry, and people are talking about gamifying their customer journey. Augmented reality and virtual reality are so much in their infancy as augmenting channels or adding new channels. Gordon mentioned the brand equity, and when you get there, the benefits are for those brands. It means selling at a premium and not selling at the lower price. It means a faster conversion to purchases, more add-on sales, or For people who are in recurring service revenue like Verizon, it means lower churn, greater renewals, higher margins, those awesome net promoter scores, and this will be led by CX professionals, be led by the CXPA community. So I see tremendous opportunities. There's a lots of areas where you need to focus and act with precision, based on the things we spoke about here today. But I am absolutely convinced that some brands are going to figure this out, and they're really going to take themselves to the next level because of it.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine there'll be fast followers as a result of them figuring out the right, simple way to do this, because they will do it. They will figure it out. So as we look at kind of the conclusions of the conversations that we've had here with you today, most people are open to sharing data, but they have to know that they can trust you. They're happy to give that information if it means that life is more convenient for them, they can get the things that are important to them, and that you can treat them in a way that makes them feel special. And the strongest customer relationships are based on trust and transparency, as Gordon and Peter both stated. So I often, in looking at this data, I was recalled working in Dallas years ago at JCPenney, and I went up into their museum, which talked all about James Cash Penney and how he started in this business. And so this was in the 1800s, and he opened his first store, which is called the Golden Rule. And the Golden Rule was do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So very much along the lines of Gordon's comments about treating people like, treating data like it's your data. And what his purpose there was really he knew everyone. He knew everyone by name. He knew their family. He knew their financial situation, and he could service them in the way that they expected because of that knowledge. The brands industry, and in my industry and retail in particular, knowing that customer is exactly what the retailers are trying to get to. And as long as they can build that environment in such a way that really focuses on the customer's journeys, it allows us to put the consumer in charge of what's happening there. If we make it simple so it's not complex for them to do, and that we do it quickly and we're as honest as possible. I think we've hit on all of these different points along the way, but so let's all, I hope that we can be as good as JCPenney was as they started this business years ago, because I think that relationship that we're trying to get to is absolutely critical for those and for brands to be successful in delivering that customer experience their clients want. So I was going to check to see if we had any questions, Pete.
No, we've been answering those questions as we went along, so we're good right now.
Okay, great. So this is the link for, pardon?
I was going to say thank you, Amrita, a voice that was not
a voice from somewhere else. Yes, she shall remain nameless. No problem. So the white paper can be downloaded at this address as well, and we've got some other information for you on the Verizon site. But there will be, as you the information for this webinar and for the paper that's associated with it will be with the CXPA, and you can certainly download when you get the content for the website. So we'll send you that information and give you access to be able to download the white paper if you don't have that already. So I just want to thank you guys for joining today, and we've enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you've learned something new. And if you have questions for us, we'd love to hear from you. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us again today. We hope you enjoyed hearing from Peter and Gordon and Jerry from Verizon. Hopefully, you're walking away with fresh new ideas and insight today. As a reminder, we have recorded this webinar, and it will be emailed to you later today. The recording will be posted on the webinar page of the CXPA, along with the sites to the white paper that Jerry has mentioned. If you are a CCXP, your CRC for attending this webinar will be added to your account within 2 weeks. And again, I'd like to thank Gordon, Peter, and Jerry for this great presentation and discussion today. I'd also like to mention our appreciation for Verizon and the ongoing support of the CXPA. We hope you all have a good rest of the day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.